Hello and welcome to Python Fundamentals Module 4. This is the last of our major tutorials and it focuses on files. You are probably familiar with the idea that you have files on your computer or your phone that your phone or computer can then save things as files. You can attach them to emails and send them. Well, it turns out that you can actually create, manage, read, amend, delete files from Python. That Python has the ability to work with files directly. In fact, we're going to be dealing with just text files now, but know that Python can read full binary files, so it can read images, it can read audio, it can read anything. It can write text files, Excel files, read Excel files, use data. So it's got powerful capabilities. So we're going to be doing the basics of working with files right now. We're going to start with going out on the web and downloading a file using the capture URL command, or curl, and then we're going to go and see what we can do with those files once we have them. All right, so here we go. So first of all, when I come down, you'll see that there is a special instruction here that curl imports files to a Jupyter session from a web address. What's important to note here is we've never seen a command start with an exclamation point before. The reason we haven't seen that is that syntax is for running a shell command in the computer in a Jupyter session. It doesn't work in standard Python. It just works in a Jupyter notebook. So this particular command line interface syntax is only good in a Jupyter notebook. That's going to be important later. I just want to note it right now. And notice I even have an explanation here that this is a way to run a command interface supporting curl. And curl actually is a shell command, not a command or function in Python. So notice here what's happening. So here it's going to go out. I'm running a command that says capture URL. It goes out to the web to this URL. It gets the contents of this URL and it runs an open subcommand that creates this file poem1.txt and puts the contents of the URL into this file. We could have named this whatever we want, but we do happen to know that it is text. The other thing I want you to note is if I come over here and look at the files in my Python teaching code, at the moment I don't have poem.txt. In fact, if I go back to the Python teaching code, I don't see it here either. So just keep that in mind. And now we're going to run this command. I'll go back over here. I'm going to run it. So here we go. I can see that it says total percent received. So it received 56 bytes. It received 100%. And it shows me the speed. So it gave me some stuff. It looks like it actually got the file. If I come over here, I now see that seconds ago I received poem.txt. So I now have that file. So this command went out to the web, got the file, and put it on my local computer on my hard drive. So that's cool, but that was not Python. That was a shell command doing that. Now I can actually come down here and I can open this file in read mode. So there are different modes for opening files, and this keeps us from messing things up, because if you open something in read mode, you can be sure you're not going to damage it. And this becomes really important when you're trying to save data and not corrupt it. So read mode's very handy that way. And built into Python is an open function for working with files. So that's super cool. All I have to do is create a variable name and then assign it to the result of the open function. And the open function points to the name of the file in the local current directory. So if it were in some other place, I'd have to put a full file path. But right now it's in the same folder where my Python Jupyter notebook is, which is my Python fundamentals folder. And so I can just put the name of the file and then I can put R for read mode, and I can hit return. Now I've done that and it didn't tell me anything. It just gave me this 2. So it says that it did it, but it didn't give me anything. And now if I run this next line, it's going to actually run through and tell me that I have an input-output text wrapper. So text input-output wrapper. In other words, Python has an open connection to that file at the moment. It's telling me which file, poem1.txt. It's telling me it's in write mode. And it's telling me that it's expecting the universal text encoding 8, which is an update of ASCII. Remember when we did punch cards and we had to encode our names using ASCII? Well, UTF-8 is a more modern standard for the same thing. And those encodings can matter, especially if you're working with specialized data or other languages. So we've got this thing now. We've got this poem file. And so now we could go through here and we can open a list of cities. So similarly, this is where you would put your curl command. So you would go back up to this same syntax. See how I've got this syntax here? You could even just copy it. You could copy it down here, and you could import cities.txt, which means I need this URL. Let me go ahead and see if I can get the URL. So replace all of this like this. I have to have my .o, and then I can put cities.txt. So test it, okay. So we'll test if it printed with a print statement. And so then we're going to open it. So I'm going to work through this whole example. So cities file equals open cities.txt, and I'm going to open it in read mode. And then I'm going to print cities file. And we'll see what happens. So let's do this. Let's run it. So we ran that. It downloaded it. 100% is received. I see cities.txt over here. And now I can come and run this one. And it tells me that it's an IO wrapper. How about that? So it didn't print the contents of the file, but it did tell me that there's the file and that it's working. So that's good. So if I want the contents, I have to use this read method. So once I have the file, I can use that. And notice poemfile.read. So up here, we just imported poem file. So if you've restarted your Jupyter notebook, it won't be in memory. You'll have to reopen it. But at the moment, it's in the working memory of my current file, current Jupyter notebook. So I can just run this thing. And here we use this read method. And it put the contents of the file into poem contents. And now if we just run that, I see the contents of the file. And of course, now if I run it with a print statement, it will read these line feeds like that. And now we see the whole thing. So there we go. So the read.read is very handy. So now you can do that. Use the cities file we just imported and go ahead and print it out, use the read and print it out, and then you'll see the contents of the cities file. We can also read a specific number of characters in the file. So sometimes, especially if it's a data file and you know there are certain lengths, certain amounts of characters that matter, this becomes very handy for that kind of thing. If there's nothing left, it will tell us that. So we'll get an empty string. And so we can come in here. So you can see also here's where it says perform a refresh open to reset the read to the beginning of the file. So down here we're going to reopen the poem file. There it is. And we read just 10 characters. You see that? Read 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The spaces count as characters. And then if we run it again, it starts from the second half of the word repeat. So we get the peat, and then we get a line feed and loops. And if we keep reading it, it will keep doing that. So we could actually just keep going that, loops, loops, loops. And then if we come down here and repeatedly run it, then it will just run back through it over and over. So we can keep going until it ends. And there, it's ended. So the file has, basically, when you use the read method, it goes through the whole file, but it will only go through to the end. It doesn't go back and start from the start when it runs out. It just goes to the end. And I just ran it a bunch of times. I saw the rest of the file, and notice it picked right up. So loops loo, and if I go way back up here, and then we've got loops, I repeat, loops, 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 I repeat until I break. And then if I go down here, I see loops, loops, loops. Let me see. Loops, I repeat, loops, loops, loops. And then I got a loo, so it took 10 characters. Loops, loops, I repeat until I break. So poem parts, where did we get our poem? Oh, so it took these pieces and then it added the rest to it. So you can kind of see how that worked. All right. So then digits of pi, so we've got a whole nother one here. We can go get this digits of pi and open it, the text, read the first 4 characters into pi digits, print pi digits, add 2 pi digits with a string addition, so we get the next 4 characters. I think you can do that. Very similar to what we just saw up above. Read does return a string, so even if it is numbers, we'd have to cast it to make sure. So that's worth knowing. They can be manipulated just like any other string, and they can be tested. So here we can open our poem file again to reset it. And now we have a poem part, and we can read 6 more characters and put them in title. So there's loops. Then we can read 6 more characters and check is alpha. So false is alpha because of the line feed. This character is not an alphabet character. And then we print, here's what, because see, we had this line feed character. And then down here, this is important too. We can actually tell it to do poem text, and we can give it a beginning and an ending. So we may not have noticed that up above, but because it's actually a string, we can do slicing. And so here we've sliced it, and we've taken from character 8 to 26 of poem text. And that's, of course, we reset the whole poem here with the new open command, and we got the whole thing into poem text. So that works fine. And I think you're good here. I think you can do all of these pieces. So test is upper. Yep. String initials, else if. So I think you're good there. You should be able to do that. So now as we start to move down, we've learned about open and read, the read method, but there's actually, you can read as a file into a list where each line is a list item. That's kind of cool, because then we know what to do with lists. So read lines is pretty cool. So here we're going to download another poem. So now we've got poem 1. And here we can use this read lines command. So we've opened the poem file as a read method, and then we're going to read it as a list. And look what happened. When we print out read lines here, we see that we've got each line in a list item. And so now we can do anything we want to do with a list. So we can use a for in loop, and we can print it out. So very simple, fast, pretty cool. Read lines. So another thing we can do. So what's interesting here is, remember, the print statement by default has a character at an end line feed. So we might, because the line feeds are already in there, we might want to go over here and say end equals nothing, and now hit return, and now it will stick all of our stuff together instead of putting a double line feed, because we actually already have line feeds in the content. What I'm doing there is quite important. It relates to extraction, translation, and loading, which is the process of pulling data into Python so that you can do data analytics or maybe save it to another format. And it's in that process that you look at the source you're using and you realize some of its limitations or design flaws, and you fix them. And I just realized that I was getting a double line feed, and I didn't want that. And so because I knew that I could remove the automatic line feed from the print function by specifying a null or blank end character, that fixed that problem. But that's the kind of thing that you do as you actually do this kind of extraction, translation, and loading. We're extracting data from a file and we're loading it into Python. And in this case, we're doing a little bit of translation too, because we're changing the way that it behaves. So down here, we're going to import cities again. So we did that up above. We'll do it again here. And then use read lines and print each line of cities by iterating the list. We just learned iterating lists, and you just saw an example of it with the for in loop. So I think you're ready for that. Read lines, once again, you have some options here. So you can see like for line in read lines, poem lines, count equals. So here the count variable has to be initialized, but then equals line -1. So remember, going in reverse. So we're going to actually reverse everything here. It's kind of interesting. So now let's run it, because basically we can tell what that's going to do. So loops, 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 and then we can print it out, and there it is. And then if we did this, remove the last character of each list item, which is there. So here we're going to run the line until the first character back from the end. So let's run that. And until the first character back from the end would have been 0. Now we're back beyond that. And so it takes out the slash and the in. And now you see we've actually done more data translation here. We've actually removed all of that, and now we can hit print, and now we don't have that double return happening. So we figured out a way to fix it. All right, and we did that because we could refer to each item in the list. And our count started at 0, which was the first one, and then each time the loop went through, it changed to the next one by doing a plus equals. It upped the count. Remove new line characters from cities. So this is very much the same task we just saw. I think you're ready for that. The close method is quite important. So when you're done using a file, you should close it. So here we can hit run. I can print out my file, and then I need to hit close. And you don't see any result from close. But if I go back up here and run poem1 read lines, so here, you'll see that the IO operation is on a closed file. So because it's no longer open, because we closed it. So it's set up here that we should close it to free resources. What that means is that Python keeps this information in memory. And if you don't remember to close a file, not only can it fill up your memory over time. That's called a memory leak. But it also can cause a lock on the file to block other programs from accessing the file to do things. And in a software setting, that can be a real problem. It can be a bug. Both of those things are bugs, the memory leak and the lock. And it's the kind of thing that causes crashes in software. So when you're done using a file, you need to close it to free up memory. And that's exactly what we're learning here. You just run this close method, and then Python will take care of all the necessary close down operations to free the resources and allow others to use the file. Cities, you're going to open cities, you're going to read the lines of cities, you're going to print the cities that start with D, or so you're going to have a loop here that's going to check if they start with D and then print. Test that the file is closed. The way you test if it is closed, so up here they didn't really tell you how do I test if the file is closed. Well, one way is to say you can just do if. Watch this. So if I come through here, if poem1 print poem1 is true, and then down here we'll do the same thing. Else print poem1 is false. All right, so I'm going to run this bottom one first. So here it tells me poem1 actually exists. Maybe I got my test wrong here. Let's see if I can print poem1 and see it. We'll just add it on here. All right, so poem1, and my test actually is not going to show it. And see if I can get it to do it here. There's my wrapper, and if I close it, poem1. Read lines. Why am I not remembering the test for a poem? You know what? In some cases, when you can't remember, and let's just do this, Python file closed test. All right, we'll just pull that up and take a look here. Yeah, but I don't want one way to check is open or not. If the open, well, then yes, open. Yeah, we don't want to. That's too much trouble. Closed property. Check closed. If import OS file handler.close. That's a little bit much. So this is the OS module. We're going to see that later. I think OS error, that's the OS again. I think that I'm not going to push you on that. So I don't think that's a little too much for now. The way you would check if it's opened or not is just going to be by trying the read lines, and if you get an error, you'll know. That's the way you're going to check. This guy, the poem, is actually going to, the variable exists, and because the variable exists, even though it's closed, it's not going to, let me see if I can do poem1 dot. I don't think that'll run. No, there's no describe. Closed. False. Okay, let's try it here. Poem1.closed truths. Ah, that's what it was. So actually, that's the way, there's your way, is to check the closed attribute. And then you'll know if it's open or closed. So when it's open, it'll say false, it's not closed. And when it is closed, it will say true, it is closed. So there you go. So test that the file is closed. That's how you do that test. I don't think he went over that, actually. I don't think that was up here in the example. But that is what you need to do. All right, so I'll scroll down here. Poem2, so import Poem2. You can do that. Read mode, create a list of strings. So that's read lines. Called Poem2 from each line of text, read lines. Remove the new line character. You know how to do that. Print Poem2 lines in reverse order. So we'll just go, that's just iterating through it in reverse. So you can do that. All good. Let's see down here now. We get a little bit deeper. We've been learning read lines and close. Now we're going to read one line at a time. So unlike read lines, we're going to use read line. And notice, unlike read lines, read line reads a line as a string. All right. And each time you run read line, it moves to the next available line in the file. So if you were to run, so if we import a poem and then we run 3 different read lines, it will import 3 different lines into these 3 different variables. So here we go. We're going to import this again to get a clean copy. We're going to open up the poem file. And now I'm going to read these 3 different lines. And then I'm going to print them. And there they are. And it got 3 different lines, and if I were to do another one, I get another one. And look, if I rerun this, I repeat until I break. That's the last line. So when I run it again, I get nothing. If I run it again, I still get nothing because I'm at the end of the file. And then finally, I can close it and release the memory. So read line produces a string, and it automatically advances the file to the next line. So that's worth knowing. Rainbow colors, I think you're ready for this. You can go ahead, you can print the first 3 colors, very similar to what we just did. Read line in a while loop, so this is cool too. So here we can go through and notice what's happening. We're using, first of all, we got the first line. If we've just opened the file, we get the first line, and so the first line exists. It's not false, and then here we can just run while poem line, and then we can print the poem line capitalized, and then we can get the next one. And as soon as this one is blank, whoops, let me run that carry. As soon as this one is blank, notice that an empty string evaluates not true in the while loop. That's important. So that's super cool. Here we can go ahead and run it. We can come down here and run it. And here we get loops, I repeat, loops, 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 I repeat until I break. And notice it's changing it to upper. We could have done capitalize. We could have done lower. We could have done title. You know, whatever we want. So here's lower, and I have to reopen it to reset the file to the beginning and then run it. Otherwise, it won't run again. If I run this again without the open being run, then I get nothing because it's not at the beginning of the file. So I have to go up here and run the open again to get back to the beginning of the file so that I can see the change. Very cool. And the -1 is getting rid of the line feed character. And then it just keeps going until it gets the whole thing, and now I'm going to close it. All right, so rainbow colors, I think you're ready. And here you're going to use .capitalize, the method. If you can't remember your methods, we did have the cheat sheet. So remember, you can come back here. you can zoom in and take a look at the string object methods like capitalize, and you can use those to solve these problems because you know you're working with a string. Strip is kind of cool. So strip removes leading and trailing white space, including formatting characters. So it's like a quick and dirty way to get things out of the way. So here you can see our same old thing. We can run our process. And so here we've got all that junk. Now if we use strip, so see readline.strip. So it does the inside thing first, then the next thing out. And so this time, if we run the whole thing, it automatically took out the line feed characters. So that makes it easier. You don't have to go through the problem. As long as you're just taking out line feed characters and spaces, strip will work great. This is a common problem people deal with in ETL operations, which is why the strip method is there and ready to go. So again, you can do this. You can run it here with rainbow colors. I think you're ready for that. You can actually tell it if you want to. So remove the leading and trailing asterisks and take out the line feed character. So rainbow messy, let's see how this works. And let's go ahead and put it in a file. And now here we're going to print the whole thing. And we can see we've got a bunch of junk. We've got the double line feeds because we can see a skipped line for each one. See that skipped line? And then we also have these asterisks. So if I want to get rid of the asterisks and I want to get rid, so let's try this again. Run it down here. And now we're telling it to strip all of the asterisks and the line feeds. So it did it. What if I put in an E? So notice how orange ends in E. Let's just go ahead and put an E in there. And let's run this again. I've now stripped the E off of orange and the E off of blue. So I can choose things I want to strip from the ends. What if I were to put an R? So what if I put an R instead here? And then I run it. I've now stripped the R off of red. So you get the idea, hopefully. This allows you to trim off junk that comes in on the edges of your content. And I think you're ready for that. You should be able to do that. You're going to import cities messy. And so you'll see what's in there. You're going to strip colons. I think you're ready for that. Here, poem messy in read mode. You're going to strip trailing parentheses and new lines. I think you're ready for that. And then print it. So you're going to clean it up. You are learning ETL here, which is super useful. It is important in all of the data operations happening, whether it's in security or in sales or in accounting or in software writing and integration, just all over the place. These kinds of things matter. So it's possible to write to a file. So we haven't been writing to a file, but we are about to do that. So right now you can notice that we can open a file in a different mode. We can open it in write mode or write plus read mode, which is what W plus means. Previously, when we opened a file, we opened it with this R flag back here, but notice that can be a W. There are a bunch of different modes. So notice when you open something in write mode, it will create a new file or overwrite existing files. All previous data will be lost. So W is going to write over anything you've got already. So here, if we open a new file, that's fine, but if we named it the same thing as something that existed, it would actually have overwritten it. And now we can use this .write method to write some text to the file. So I'm going to run the .write method, and it went and told me that it put 77 characters into the file. And now I'm going to close the file and reopen it in read mode. And I'm going to then print the text. And there's our text. And notice this is line 1. And it has a line feed and etc. So there we go. So it works. If you do it in write plus mode, after the write, the pointer is at the end of the text that's been written. So to read the entire file, the pointer needs to be at the beginning of the file. Use seek to set the file pointer. We're about to learn about seek in a minute, but just know that if you're in write plus mode, it's going to leave the pointer. There's a pointer or a cursor. You know how when you write a Word document, there's that little blinking line that tells you where you are, so that when you're typing, you know that you're there. And if you want to go edit something in a paragraph, you have to go click to that spot and the little blinking cursor will be there. Well, Python's doing that. Python has a single cursor in the file somewhere, which is the point it reads from and writes from, just like when you're editing a Word document. Thing is, we can't see it. It's not graphical. And so we have to keep in mind where it would be as we're programming. And if you're in write plus mode, that little blinking cursor is wherever the end of the most recent write was. All right? And so if you're going to read from a file that's been written to, and you want to read from the beginning, you're going to have to tell it to go back to the beginning. And that's what the seek method does, and we'll get to that in a minute. So I think you're ready for write mode here. So this is very similar to what you just saw. I think you can do this. Seek 0 is what we were just talking about. So seek 0 is the way to go back to the beginning of a file. So there you go, new file.seek 0, and then you can do read and print context. And so here's our new file again. It's overwritten, and so we have a blank file. We have nothing there. See, I ran this and I got nothing because it just overwrote it. And now we put 52 characters into this thing. And now if I hit, look at that. If I just hit read, it's trying to read from the end of the file. There's nothing there. So now I can go and use seek 0, and it will move that cursor or pointer to the beginning of the file. And it tells me where it is. And now I can read it and print it and close it. So that's really important to realize, that there's this cursor or pointer inside the file, and that you need to know where it is and that you can move it with seek 0. So here you can see seek 0. You can move to the start of the file, read it, close the file. I think you're ready for that. Seeking with an offset and a wince is kind of difficult to comprehend because it's different from slicing. It's a very old method in Python. And because it's old, it doesn't quite behave the way you'd expect. So you got to pay some close attention here. So here we go. So we can seek to a specific character with this offset. So, and then wince says starting from where. So seek offset values and wince arguments. And so seek can set the pointer to a desired index from the beginning of the file. The example below moves the character to offset to the 10 to the 11th character. So if we seek 10, we're going to start on 11. All right. And then wince has 3 modes, and 0 means from the beginning. 1 means from the current location of the cursor, and 2 means to the end of the file. And with 2, the offset is always 0. So you can't do a negative offset. Well, maybe you can. Actually, we'll play with that in a second. So here we're going to seek 0. We're going to go to the beginning of the file. So we're going to write some stuff into the file. We're going to go to the beginning. We're going to read it, and then we're going to print it. Because we're in write plus mode, this should all work. So there we go. And it worked. So here we're going to go to that same file. We're going to seek 13, and we're going to read from the 14th character. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So let's run it. unction. Just what I expected. And then down here, we can slice from the 14th character to the end. That's another thing we could do. So it has the same result if we do it that way. All right, and so now we can use the wince argument. So remember, wince2 means the end of the file. So this is a way to go to the end of the file and write another line so that you don't write over anything. Then we can go back to the beginning of the file, read it, and print it out. And sure enough, we now see that we added something to the end, and then we went forward and did more. We can go back to the beginning and actually rewrite. So we wrote 40 characters. Now let's read it and see what shows up. Now we actually overwrote that first line. See that? So we went back to the beginning and then we wrote over the first line, and now we've got something different up there. All right, so wince argument, files, you seek to the start of the file, pointer to the end of the file, and write some more, go back to the start and read the whole thing and print it. I think you're ready for that. Here you're seeing that there are more modes available for reading and writing files in Python. In fact, for each of these modes, there's even a mode that has a B in it. That's a binary mode. That's what you use for image files and other things. All of these modes are for just working with text, ASCII text type stuff. And so they work for all of that. Notice there's a mode here called append. And then there's R+. So W+ is write and read mode that overwrites the file with the same name. And R+ is safer. It's read and write mode with no overwrite. So that's pretty important. And this A mode is for appending to the end of the file with no overwrite. But then you can't read it. So this is a common mode when Python is logging system operations, just to keep sending stuff to the end of the file. It's faster. When you have to have read mode, it slows things down a little bit. And when you can have millions of database calls per minute on an online store, those little speed decreases become quite important. So these other modes, here they are. So here we can open the poem.txt file in R+, means we won't overwrite. We can open poem.txt in A+. And we can see that these modes are going to allow us a little bit. It doesn't blank out the file contents with an overwrite. Append modes differ from the write modes. They don't blank out the overwrite. The append pointer is set to the end of the file for every write. Plus, A+ is append mode plus read. So in other words, every time you write in A mode, it will always put it to the end. You can't write into the middle of the file. Over here, you have that ability to write into the middle of the file potentially. It just won't overwrite the file. So R+ works like that. And here we're writing it as a function, so we're making a logger function. So there it is. And here we can actually open this file in W+, so we'll have a blank file. Now we've got it. And now we can open our log file in A+ mode. There it is. And then down here we've got our log file, and we can just send the log file to logger, and it will prompt us to enter a log item. Opened file. Looked at file. And then closed file. And then I just hit enter to quit. And you can see that it went through and it collected it all. So logger ran and ran. So logger has this log entry, and it's doing log.write. And we fed it a log. Now the log, the type of the log is a file, so we sent it a log file. and it went back to the log file and it saw 0, it read it all, and then it printed it out. And so we could see that it did that. It added a nice number to it. Very easy to use. Okay, so here we're going to create a file, a count file, and the count is 0. So there it is. We saw it 0, we stripped it, we printed it, review and run the example. And so here we're actually going to open the file. We're going to go to the beginning. We're going to read line strip. Then we're going to int count line 10 plus 1. And then we're going to go from there. And 10, by the way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That gets rid of this. And so now let's go through here and get what we can do. And we're going to write the incremented value. So we're going to go out to the end of that again. We're going to write the string. We're going to seek 0 after. We're going to then print this out and then see what it's got. And so before count is 0, after count is 1. Now count is 1, count is 2. Because right here we're reading to the end of the line from, remember, from after all of this stuff of count is that. So we went ahead and got that out of there. We're ignoring that. And because we're using the strip, we just get the number. And so because we just got the number, Python interprets it as an integer with this type casting, and then it's able to add 1 and then increment it up. So we've taken that content out of the log and we're using it and going up, and we can keep running it, and we can see that it goes to 4 and 5 and 6 as we go. And then of course here when we write the count, we're writing it as a string. So very cool. Here we have some reads a file, updates count. File always has 1 line. That is, the count is in, where in is an integer. And so read line strip plus 1, and this is count line. So there's a function. And now we're going to get count before, count after. And we can see it's doing a range. We've seen range before, and so it just ran it 5 times, specifically 5 times, because we used a range, and it just went 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I think you're ready. You're ready to run this one. So this has some setup code for you, and then you'll write your code below. So you're going to append, you're going to seek. I think you're ready for that. R plus mode, this is very similar to what we saw up above. And I think, you're ready for that. And that's it. That gives you a good sense of files. One thing I want to point you to, if you need to open a file and run it, and so I'm going to go over here, I'm going to open VS Code for a minute. And I'm going to show you the same code. So let's go and go over to close that, close this, other work. And I'm going to go over and pick up Python teaching code, which is here, and resize my windows so it fits right into what you can see. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file. So I'm going to hit Command N, and I'm going to save my file. And what I can save my file as is, let's just save it as file with import os.py. So the thing about import os.py is when you try to do, let's go back over to the Jupyter Notebook for a second. And remember, we were talking about that curl statement. So I'm going to go way back up and find a curl statement. Because I told you at the beginning that curl just doesn't work in standard Python. So if I were to take this code and try to run it over here, so I save it and then I run it. So if I run it here, there it goes, and I have invalid syntax. It's telling me that this doesn't work. So what I have to do instead is I have to make a Python-based version, and there's the OS library. And what I can do is I can say that my command, import OS, and then I can do os.system and then I can put my command. Now what I want you to note is that I am currently inside of KSU Scrape. So I am inside of this KSU Scrape folder. I'm going to save this and I'm going to run it. So I'm going to come over here and run it. And do you notice I got my whole output here? It told me 100%, it downloaded it, and even though I'm in this KSU Scrape, I now see down below, let me see if I close all this stuff. Close, close, close. Poem1.txt. And I'm going to delete that. And I'm going to run this again. And now here's poem1.txt again. Did you see it showed up? This is how you would run that file import in true Python, other than a Jupyter notebook. So just keep that in mind. It may come in handy at some point. I'm sure it will. And have fun. This is very powerful what you're learning right now. So have patience, reach out, document errors, help others, and enjoy it.